Hello everyone, welcome to Zoho Sheets webinar. In this video, we'll be looking at how you can record and use Vba macros inside Zoho Sheet. So you can use these Vba macros in order to automate certain repetitive tasks that you perform inside your spreadsheet. So in this video, I'll be giving you a brief introduction about macros in Zoho Sheet, followed by a demonstration where I'll be showing you how you can record and use those macros inside your spreadsheet in Zoho Sheet. So Zoho Sheet supports VBA macros, that is Visual Basic Application macros. So this is the same language that is also used for macros in Microsoft Excel. In Zoho Sheet, you can create macros in two ways. That is, you can either record the macros and execute or run them, or you can also write the macros from scratch if you're someone who's well versed with VBA. In Zoho Sheet, you can also make use of buttons in order to run or execute the macros that you've already created. So you can simply insert a button, assign the desired macro to it, and in a single click of the button, you can run the desired macros as well. And Zoho Sheet also supports import of Excel files that contain the VBA macro code. So if you have any XLSM files that contain the VBA macro code, you can import them directly into Zoho Sheet with the macro code intact. So now we'll jump into the demonstration and I'll show you how you can record and run VBA macros inside Zoho Sheet. And in this video, we will not be looking at the writing VBA macros part. We'll be only looking at the recording and execution of macros. And also we'll see how you can assign these macros to a button and run macros using the button as well. This is the spreadsheet I'll be using for the demonstration here. So you can see that I have two different worksheets using which I'll be showing how you can use macros in order to perform repeated tasks that involve formats as well as inserting columns, etc. So first we'll start with this example that we have. So in this worksheet, you can see that we have three different data tables that actually represent simple expenses for the month of Jan, Feb, and March 2021. So you can see the values, you can see the expense categories, the projected and actual values, as well as the difference between the two. So now we'll see how you can use macros in order to format this particular table. And as a part of formatting, we'll be using cell formats, text formats, as well as number formats. So we'll see how macro captures all of these actions and how you can execute all of these actions in a single click as well. And in this demonstration, I'll also be showing the difference between absolute and relative cell reference while you are using macros as well. So if you're someone who's using formulas, you'll be familiar with these terms, that is absolute and relative cell references. But if you're someone who's not familiar with these terms, not a problem. I'll show you how these two will differ when you're using them in macros. So first we look at an example of the absolute cell reference, and we'll see how we can record a macro while formatting this table, and we'll see how we can execute it. So for that, I'm going to show the formatting using the first table here. So I'll be recording the macro using the first table, and we'll see how we can run that as well. So here, after placing the cell selection here, I'm going to Tools. You can find the VBA macros option here. So you can see an option here to create a macro, and you can also see a direct option here for recording macro. And then you can see the option for the editor. So you can go to the editor and you can start writing, or you can also make any changes to the existing macros as well. You can see an option called Manage. So if you want to edit or run an existing macro, you can do that using this Manage option. And you can also see the help links for the macros inside Zoho Sheet here. So if you want to do a quick reference about the VBA macros, or if you want to see any sample macro codes, you can use these links here. So now let's start recording the macro. So once you click on the record macro option, you can see that a create macro dialog opens up. So here you'll have to give a name for the macro, format AB, indicating the absolute cell reference. And if you want, you can also give a short description about the macro. So you can say what this macro is all about and what kind of actions this macro is going to capture or execute. So this is just for a better understanding of the macro. And finally, you can see an option here called Use Relative Reference. So if you want this macro to capture the actions in a relative cell reference, you can click on this particular checkbox. But now I'm going to show you this example with absolute cell reference, so I'm not going to click on the checkbox. I'm just going to keep it unchecked. So once I've given the macro name, I'll click on record. So in the top right corner, you can see a small indication that is showing that the macro recording is in progress. So now let's start performing the formatting options that we want to be captured in the macro. First, I'm going to, so here you can see I have applied bold, and then I'm going to change the cell color and the alignment. So here you can see I did 3 different actions. So first I applied bold, then I changed the cell's fill color, and finally I've changed the alignment of the text inside the cells as well. So now after that, I'm going to make a small change in the number format of this particular range of values I have here. So it is already in the currency format. I'm just going to make a small change to it. So here under more formats, I'm just going to change the way the negative values are being shown. So I'm going to choose this red font color indication for the negative values and click on apply. There we go. So once I've done all the desired actions, I can stop recording the macro. To stop the recording, you can simply click on the icon here. Our macro recording is done. So you can see 2 different options being shown after the recording is stopped. So one is the view code option and the other is the macro list option. So this view code option will take you directly to the VBA editor, where you can see the code of the captured macro, and if you want to make any changes, you can do that as well. And this macro list option will take you to the manage dialog, where you can see the list of the existing macros in your spreadsheet. So here I'm just going to show you how the code will be in the editor. So I'll go to view code here. So this is the VBA editor in Zoho Sheet. So as you can see, the existing macro codes will be shown on this editor page for you. So on top you can see the old macro that I have in my spreadsheet that is called AutoSum, and below that you can see the macro that we had just created. So you can see that the macro code starts from here. You can see the name of the macro, that is format_AB, and below that you can see the details about the macro given here. So on the first line you can see that the range selection is shown, followed by bold that we had applied, and then you can see the color, the alignment, another range selection that is the difference column that we had selected, and finally you can see the number format indication that we had changed. So this way you can also easily read through your macro code once you have done the recording. If you want to check and make any small changes to this code, you can do that as well. So now I don't want to make any changes to this particular captured code, so I'm just going to close the editor. So before I show you how this macro runs or can be executed, I'm just going to undo the formatting changes in this particular table. So the reason why I'm undoing the formatting changes in this table is because since we had captured or recorded the macro with absolute cell reference, once we execute the macro or run the macro, the formatting changes will happen in the same cell range which we had used for recording the macro. So that is, the formatting changes will happen in the same table here. So now I'm just going to place my cell selection here somewhere randomly. So no matter where your cell selection is placed, once you run the macro will run only in the cell range that was used for recording the macro. So now I'll go to Tools, and under VBA Macros I'll go to Manage. So this is the Manage dialog, where you can see the list of existing macros in your spreadsheet, and you can run the macro from here. So you can either run the macro from the VBA editor, or you can run the macro from the Manage dialog as well. And you can also use buttons to run the macro. I'll show you that in the next example. So now I'm going to run this macro and we'll see how the formatting changes happen. So you can see that my cell selection is not anywhere near the table here. But once I click on run, so there we go. So you can see that once I clicked on run, the formatting changes happened exactly in the same cell range that we had used for recording the macro. So this is how absolute cell reference works. No matter where your cell selection is currently placed, once you run the macro will be executed in the exact same cell range that was used for recording the macro. So now let's look at the same set of actions in a relative cell reference. So for that, I'm going to use the other two tables that we have here on right. So I'm going to use the table for Feb 2021 to record the macro, and I'll be running the macro in this particular table that represents March 2021. So in order to record the macro, I'm going to follow the same steps that we did previously. So I'll give a name for the macro now. So here I'm calling it format underscore rel, representing the relative cell reference. And one change that you have to do here is that you will have to keep this checkbox checked. So when you're using a relative cell reference, make sure that you click on this checkbox. And once that's done, you can start recording the macro. So I'm just going to perform the same formatting changes we did previously. So once that's done, I'm going to stop the recording now. So now I've stopped the recording. I'm just going to close this indication. So now you can see that we have recorded the macros. We have created the macro for relative cell reference as well. So now before we go to the run macro option, let's see how we can use a button in order to execute this particular macro. So for that, you can simply go to insert, and you can see an option called button here. Just click on that, and a button will be inserted into your worksheet. And you can see that by default it opens in an edit mode, so you can give a label for that particular button. So I'm just going to call it format underscore relative. So once you have given a name for the button, you can even resize it and reposition it based on your convenience. So once you've created the button, the next step is to assign the desired macro to this particular button. So for that, you can see an option here on the top right corner of the button. So just click on that, and you can see the context menu giving you a list of options. So the first option is assign an existing macro. So if you have a macro that is already present in your spreadsheet which you would like to assign to this button, you can choose this option. Or if you want to create a new macro that you would like to assign to the button, you can do that as well. If you want to make any changes to the label of the button, you can do that. You can also duplicate or clone an existing button along with its changes and settings. And finally, if you want to delete a button, you can use this option as well. In this particular example, we already created our desired macro, so we are going to go with the assign existing macro option. So once I click on that, you can see the list of macros being shown here. So here you can see this is the macro that we had created for relative cell reference. So I'm just going to choose that. Even if you want to create a new macro from here, you can do that as well using these two options. So now that I've selected the desired macro from the list, I'm going to choose assign. So now we have assigned our desired macro to the button. In absolute cell reference, we saw how the current cell selection had no impact on the cell range where the macro was being executed. But whereas in the relative cell reference, we'll see how the current cell position will have an impact on where the macro gets executed or runs. So in relative cell reference, the macro will run on a cell range corresponding to the current cell selection. So you'll have to place the cell selection relative to where you want the macro to run. So now I want to format this table, that is March 2021. So I'm going to place my cell selection here, and then I'm going to run the macro. So here I've placed the cell selection, and I'm going to click on the button here, and we'll see how the macro runs. There we go. So you can see that in a single click of the button, the macro ran in this particular cell range where corresponding to the current cell selection that I had. So you can use this particular macro in any cell range that you want. So no matter if you have values or not, you can use this to perform actions. So I'll just show you another example here. I'm just going to place my cell selection randomly here in this cell range, and I'll run the macro. And you can see how the formatting changes have been applied. So based on the current cell selection that you have, no matter where you've placed your current cell selection, corresponding to that position, the macro will be executed. So this is the difference between the absolute and relative cell reference when you're using it in a macro. And in this worksheet example, we also saw how you can use macros to perform a series of formatting actions that involve a cell format, text format, and number format as well. So now let's move on to the next worksheet, where I'll be using a macro in order to insert a column, as well as I'll be using a small formula as well. So we'll see how we can do that. In this worksheet, you can see that I have a sample data that represents the total population of a few countries here. So you can see that I have the data that has been sorted in such a way that the latest data is shown in front, followed by the past years. So the data here is only from 2010 to 2015. So now we'll see how we can use macros in order to perform actions that involve insert column and a simple formula as well. So now, as we saw in the previous examples, I'm just going to start the macro recording and perform the desired actions. So here I'll give the name as insert column, and you can see that I'm leaving the relative reference checkbox checked because I want to use the relative cell reference for this particular macro, and I'll click on record. So now the macro recording has started. So let's start with the desired actions. So what I want to do is I want to insert a column between the columns A and B. That is, before column B, I want to insert a new column so that I can enter the values for the next years, that is 2016, 2017, and so on. So for that, I'll just right click, and in this context menu, under insert, I'll click on column before. So you can see that a new column has been created, and here you can see that the format has also been retained for the new column. So now I'm just going to insert a simple formula so that the header of this column also comes automatically when the new column is inserted. So here this new column is supposed to have the header as 2016, that is the next year from the previous column. So for that, I'm just going to insert a simple formula. So I'll give equals this value plus 1. So you can see I'm just inserting a very simple formula. So this header, that is the header in the new column, has to have one value above the previous column header. So you can see I've given the formula as equals C1 plus 1, and I'll click on enter. So now I've inserted the new column, and I've also given a simple formula so that the header also comes along with the new column. So once the desired actions are done, I'm just going to stop the recording. So let's see the code for this particular macro that we had recorded. You can see this is where the macro code starts. So this is the name of the macro that we had just created, that is insert column. And here you can see 3 lines of code. So the first one is the range selection that was initially placed, and then you can see the insert column line, and finally you can see the formula being shown. So this is the formula on the right side. So here within the double quotes you can see the actual formula that will be used for the macro while running. So here you can see that the VBA macro uses the R1C1 cell reference style. So R1C1 is nothing but the R represents row and C represents column. The positive values near R and C will represent those rows or columns after the current row or column, whereas negative values will represent the row or column before the current row or column. So here near R, I'm going to give the value as 1. So this is an absolute cell reference, that is R1 is an absolute cell reference, whereas here near C you can see that 1 is given within square brackets. So in this particular cell reference style, when there's square brackets used, it means that it is a relative cell reference. So here the row is going to stay constant, whereas the column will change relatively. I'm giving the row as constant because the column header will be in the first row no matter where the column is being inserted. And you can see plus 1 in the formula here. So this way you can make any changes that you want to make to the captured code, or if you're someone who's well versed with VBA, you can even build your own macro around the recorded macro code as well. So once that is done, make sure to click on the save option here in the editor. You can also directly save and run your macro from here. Now I'm just going to save the changes I had done. So now I've saved the changes that I had done. So I'll close the editor. And again, I'm going to use a button in order to run this macro. So similar to the previous example, I'm going to insert a button, give it a name, and now I'm going to assign the macro that we had just created. So this is the macro we had created, that is insert column. So I'll choose it and click on assign. So now that we have assigned the macro to the button, let's see how this macro works. So you can see that I've placed my current cell selection here in 2016 because I want the column to be inserted before the column B, that is after column A and before column B. So I'm placing my cell selection here. Remember that we have chosen the relative cell reference for our macro here. So once I've placed the current cell selection here, I can simply click on the button to run the macro. And there we go. So you can see how a new column has been inserted here, and you can also see that the column header also comes automatically along with the new column. So this way you can use macros in order to perform repetitive tasks that you have in your spreadsheet. Not just one action, but a series of actions can be performed using a single click. So here you can see how I can simply click on this button to insert columns in a matter of seconds. So here you can see how I can insert columns along with the column header quickly in a matter of seconds in a single click using macros. These are just basic and simple examples about how you can record and use VBA macros inside your spreadsheet. But you can also use these macros for various other actions as well. And apart from the simple formula that I had shown in the example here, you can also use macros to capture other formulas that you're using in your spreadsheet as well. So in this video, we saw how you can record a macro and capture actions that involve formatting options like cell formats, number formats, text formats, column insert, and also formulas, and how you can run those macros. And we also saw how you can make changes in the VBA editor and save those changes and run your macros from the editor as well. And we also saw how you can insert buttons inside your spreadsheet and run those macros that you've created in your spreadsheet using these buttons in a single click as well. Hope you all found this video helpful. Do try recording and executing macros inside Zoho Sheet and give us your feedback as well. And if you need any help with VBA macros in Zoho Sheet, you can write to us at support@zohosheet.com. And if you have any feedback about this video, you can drop them as comments below. You can also check out our previous webinar videos using the link in the description. Thank you all for watching this video. See you in the next session.